This is my third video. Hopefully it will be an improvement over the first two. Its purpose is to take us on a visual tour of White Creek's 10 historical markers. The idea of historical markers originated in the mid-1920s as the nation prepared to celebrate its 150th anniversary. The great majority of the small historical markers you see along the highways were erected between 1926 and 1936. The state education department funded them and made them up after an application was made and documentation supplied. Funding ran out by 1939, but the education department continued to supervise the program and assist with it up into the 1960s. The increasing amount and speed of traffic made the small signs difficult to read, and stopping to read them created a traffic hazard. This led the state to decide to move to bigger and more expensive signs that were located farther back from the road and could be read as people sped by. This was a lot more expensive and was mostly done along the thruway and roads like that. It was the first actual state program. The 1926 one was never intended to be a permanent program. It was to be temporary and limited. The responsibility for the programs began to get kicked from one state agency to another, ending under the Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation in 1976. In the 1960s and 70s, the state historian was in charge of the small markers, but today the state has abandoned them and has no program at all. Local authorities are now in charge of them, but often property owners maintain them or sometimes remove them. The markers were intended to commemorate the places where local events took place, or where buildings or businesses were once located. Documentation was required to erect one, but occasionally it wasn't adequate or can't be verified. Today there are stricter standards of evidence required to erect one, or at least to get a grant to erect one. We will begin at the junctions of Route 67 and 22, visit the southernmost marker in the town, and then follow a rough circle east, north, west, and then south back to where we started. Here we are on Circle Drive at the intersections of routes 22 and 67. To get started, we will cross 22 here and take 67 a short distance west to where Grandma Moses Road turns off to the left. This was the original Route 22. A quarter-mile down on the left is a marker denoting the Moses Homestead, erected by the Washington County Historical Society in 1978. This sign isn't on the state list of historical markers, but it should be. When I met her once as a boy, she no longer lived here but across the road. Will Moses lives here now and paints, too, here at Mount Nebo. From the Grandma Moses sign, we return to the intersection and take Circle Drive for a short distance, turning right onto County Route 69. When that ends at a T intersection, we take a right onto County Route 68. About a mile and a quarter along 68, we come to where North Huzik Road joins 68, about 3 miles in total. We take a right and turn around in front of the old red schoolhouse, now used as a garage, and we are at the log church marker. My younger brother and I both attended the Red Schoolhouse for a very short time before the Central School was formed. The log church was a small log building of around 600 square feet, with a dirt floor, no heat, and probably fewer no windows than a door. Although the marker claims the building was burned, neither I nor two other historians could find any record or mention of that. The British forces didn't come through here. The Indians may when they fled the battle, but they were in a hurry, and there were 2 or 3 houses in the immediate vicinity which would have been better for looting. We did find mention that the church, restarted in 1779, outgrew the building by 1784 and sold it in 1790 after moving into their new building in Center White Creek. From the log church sign, we turn right back onto County Route 68 and go east about a quarter mile to the John Wood sign on the left. John's house was at the top of the bank, and the foundation was still there when I was young, but the county cut the bank back to straighten out the curve, and only a bit is left. A district meeting was held at John Wood's house to choose officers for the newly formed 18th Albany County Militia in May of 1776. Evidently not much occurred after that. There is no mention of an 18th militia in the colony or state records. Most of the officers chosen show up in the 16th. However, the 18th shows up again in newspaper articles after the war. John was a Quaker, and though he was referred to as captain, he never seems to have fought. He was wanted by the Committee for Detecting and Defeating Conspiracies for lack of zeal for a time, but was cleared. He and his family moved to the Quaker community of Poplar Ridge in Cayuga County in 1799, where his son invented the cast iron plow. Traveling east on Route 68, we turn off to the left on Meeting House Road. A little farther on where Quaker Hill Road joins, we turn left again and park. Here is where the Quaker Meeting House was located. Edward Aiken, who lived a bit further along the Meeting House Road, rented the land for 1 peppercorn a year. Aiken was nominally a Quaker, but was noted for his violent bad temper and doesn't seem to have attended meetings. The Quakers built their first meeting house here and later built a bigger one. You will notice there are 3 cemeteries right at this corner. None of them is the actual Quaker cemetery. The Quakers didn't use stones, so their graves have been lost, and who was buried here is unknown. Turning around and turning right to go back the way we came on Meeting House Road, we come to Route 68 again and make a left turn. Our next stop is a Union Academy sign on the right next to the White Creek Country Store. The Union Academy was the first free academy in New York State, the cost being borne by subscribers. It was a 2-story building with a belfry built in 1810. Access was free to all who wished to attend. It remained for nearly 50 years. Our next stop will be at the Germain Methodist Church. To get there, we turn right on Route 68 from the store and go down to the T at the end of the hamlet, where we turn right on Niles Road. Sorry, your other right, and right into the churchyard. The bicentennial sign isn't on anyone's list of historic markers. The town thought it belonged to the church, but they said no, it had been erected for the bicentennial in 1976. We will include it here as it is historic, though it now makes our tour of 10 signs into 11. While we are here, the church building was built in 1796 as a union house. It was first used as a church by the Baptists, then by both Baptists and Methodists, and now only by the Methodists. Diagonally across Niles Road is the marker for John Allen's hat shop. John Allen Jr. learned to make hats and plied his trade there. Hats were made of beaver in the early 19th century. Excessive trapping nearly caused the animal to become extinct. Mercury was used in making hats, leading to the expression mad as a hatter. John lived to be 80, so must have been more careful with the mercury than many. As the beaver became harder and more expensive to obtain, it was replaced by felted silk starting in the 1840s. There is no indication that any of John's children followed the trade. The building stood until the 1940s. As this old photo shows, the roof failed, and the building probably didn't stand long after this was taken. Peeking through the trees behind it is the Christopher Allen House, which still stands. It is a long run to the next historic marker. From the hat shop, we continue north on Niles Road until it turns into Chestnut Hill Road. Chestnut Woods was certainly a forest of large chestnuts until the blight, imported from Asia and first seen in 1904, killed them all off in the early 20th century. I personally have never seen a chestnut. The American Chestnut Foundation is now trying to reintroduce a blight-resistant variety. We continue along this road through Pumpkin Hook, a corruption of either the Algonquin name Pompanook or the Dutch Pompey and Hoik, or pumpkin angle. possibly both, as the Algonquins adopted a lot of Dutch and English words. After about 6 miles, Chestnut Hill Road ends at Ash Grove Road, County Route 67. We take a right, and after less than a quarter of a mile, we turn off at the left, at the site of the Ash Grove Methodist Episcopal Church and Cemetery marker. There is almost no place to park here without blocking the road. Ash Grove is the site of the Second Methodist Episcopal Church in America. John Wesley himself preached down Georgia way earlier, but without much success. Later, Philip Embury, at the urging of Barbara Heck, started preaching in New York City and started the John Street Church. While there, he acquired a land patent together with the Wilsons east of Ash Grove. After Wesley sent pastors over for the church in New York City, Embury moved north to the Camden patent and settled there. He got together with Thomas Ashton. Ash Grove was named after the Ashtons, not a tree, to start the new Methodist church there. There used to be a road north from here over the mountains to the Battenkilk Valley south of Camden, so it was shorter and easier to get back and forth. Philip died in a farm accident in 1775, but the church kept going and built a building. When they outgrew that, they sold it and it was moved to Sandgate, I believe, and they built a bigger one which an arsonist burned down. As Cambridge was growing faster than Ash Grove, they moved there and built what became the Embury Methodist Church. The building is still there, but the congregation no longer meets. From the Methodist Cemetery, we backtrack down Ash Grove Road to the village of Cambridge, and then along East Main Street to Route 22. Along this road and back in Pumpkin Hook, there were several water-powered mills and factories in the early days. At the light in Cambridge, we turn left on Route 22 and go a short distance south to the Central School, where our next historical marker awaits. This marker marks the general course of the war trail over which Native Americans, mostly Mohawks, raided New England and took their captives back to Canada. They usually came down Lake Champlain, down the Hudson, up the Battenkill, down through Cambridge by way of the Elkill, and up the Hoosick River into Massachusetts. Baum and his troops followed roughly the same route from Fort Miller to Walloomsac in 1777. From the school, we continue south along Route 22. Lucy seems to have been more interested in squirrels and historical markers and looks bored. Our next marker marks the place where Baum's troops first encountered American resistance as they headed towards Bennington. This was where William Waite settled, and it was called Waite's Corners, today Center White Creek. It is where the congregation from his log church moved in the 1780s. The marker is in the front yard of Cohn's garage. The skirmish didn't go well for the Americans, and several were taken prisoners. It did slow the British down somewhat. Pushing on south, as the British did in 1777, we soon come to our final historical marker, which marks the place where they camped for the night. If they had made it a couple of miles farther to Sandquark, they wouldn't have been held up for another hour the next day by a destroyed bridge. They might well have arrived in Walloomsac before American reinforcements could gather and would not have been defeated. This is the last historical marker in White Creek. The British passed over into Hoosick the next day. Baum arrived at the Sandquark Bridge by 8 a.m. to find the Americans had torn it up and was set back an hour while it was repaired. Just a short distance south, and we arrived back at the intersection of routes 22 and 67, where we began our tour. Well, that about concludes our Historic marker tour. I'm presently at the Bennington Battlefield, which is not in White Creek, but it's right on the border. In fact, balls from that cannon that was located here ended up over the line in White Creek and were dug out of farmers' fields later on. It's a good place if you ever get here when the COVID lets up to conclude your trip and have a picnic and see the place and the history of this part of the country, because a good many people from White Creek fought here on either side, both sides. They fought their neighbors, their families, their fellow church members. There were a lot of hard feelings, I expect, at the time, but we got over it. We have a great country out of it. So thank you for watching this, and hopefully when the COVID lets up you can get here and take a tour around the area.